Hello everybody and welcome to a Dwarf Fortress tutorial. In this video I'm going to be covering siege weapons, their different use cases, as well as some side-by-side comparisons of their capabilities. In Dwarf Fortress, siege weapons are used as a form of defense against oncoming enemy attacks. The three different weapons at the dwarves' disposal are catapults, ballista, and bolt throwers. Each of these use different types of ammunition and do different types of damage. Catapults are loaded with boulders. This makes them the easiest of the three to assemble. They are built out of 3 catapult parts. These components can be made out of either adamantine or wood, which are assembled at the siege workshop. Once constructed, they can be loaded by an individual dwarf with a boulder, and then fired directly at the forehead of the nearest moving creature, or target, for training purposes. When firing a catapult, assuming the boulder hits its target, it breaks into pieces. The initial impact does damage, and the pieces become sharp shards of rock, which continue to spread and do additional damage to surrounding enemies, giving them a bit of a splash damage effect. Catapults are very useful in crowd control situations, when there's large numbers of enemies and you need to put a dent in the group. Next up are ballista. Ballista are also made out of 3 parts, which can be made out of adamantine or wood. And just like the catapults, these parts are assembled at a siege workshop. Ballista are a little bit trickier to set up. Unlike catapults, which just use boulders as ammunition, ballista use ballista arrows. These can be assembled one of 2 ways. Either the player can assemble ballista arrow heads out of various different types of metal. Once the ballista arrowheads have been forged, an arrow can be assembled at a siege workshop using the arrowhead and a log. Unlike catapults, ballista deal piercing damage, which can go through multiple enemies in a line. So for maximum effectiveness, you're going to want to use sharper metals, such as steel or iron, or adamantine if you can find it. But there is a problem with these siege engines, and that is ammo is essentially one use. Usually, the ammunition will break on impact, and this goes for all 3 types. So it is kind of a risk-reward. Is it worth using the higher quality ammo, which will obviously do more damage to the enemy, but will also use up your resources faster? And that is a decision we all have to make. The third and final siege engine that we're going to be talking about in this video are bolt throwers. Now, bolt throwers do have one small quirk. They are the hardest to assemble of the 3, but they may be the most effective in the long run, although they do go through the most ammunition. In order to assemble a bolt thrower, you need a mechanism, which has to be made out of rock or metal, which is made at a mechanic shop. You need a rope, which can be either a chain or cloth. If it's cloth, then it's made at a clother's shop. And if it's a chain, it's made out of metalsmith's forge, and you need a bin. This can be made out of whatever material you like. I usually make them out of wood. Bins often end up filled with items in your stockpiles, and while this is a good thing, if you do want to make sure that you have enough bins to be able to make your bolt throwers, I recommend limiting the bins in your stockpiles. This can be done by clicking on your stockpile of choice and subtracting the number of bins down. And then lastly, just like our other siege weapons, bolt throwers use 1 bolt thrower part. Bolt thrower parts are assembled at your siege workshop, just like the rest of them. But instead of using 3, they only use a single bolt thrower part, as most of the work involved is the other items used. And of course, you can make them out of wood or adamantine, just like your catapults and ballista. Bolt throwers behave very similarly to marks dwarves, if they were stationary and fired at the rate of a minigun. Because of their extremely high fire rate, I often find myself using wooden bolts or bone bolts as their source of ammunition. However, just like your ballistas, you can use sharper materials, such as iron, steel, or copper or silver, or any other item that can be made into a bolt. The sharper the weapon, the more effective it will be, and I do have to say that I've seen entire armies of goblins get taken out by a couple of bolt throwers with high-quality ammunition. But, as I said earlier, their rate of fire is such that wooden and bone bolts are still quite effective. The last thing I wanted to note about bolt throwers is that they have these 3 pieces of text here. This is the ammunition that is currently loaded in the bolt thrower, which will show up at the bottom of the screen. The second is the ammunition that is available to the bolt thrower to be claimed. And then beneath that, you have squads that have claimed ammunition and hunters that have claimed ammunition. And while I would recommend that you make sure that you just have enough ammunition around that you can reload them, if you find that your hunters are claiming all of your ammunition, and you would like that ammo assigned to your bolt throwers, here's where to find that menu. It's under Labors, Standing Orders, and Other, and then down at the bottom there's this button that says Set Hunter Ammunition. If you have a bunch of hunters that have claimed all your ammo, you can clear that screen by just simply deleting the allowed ammunition for your hunters. But as you can see, I have plenty, so I'm not going to worry about it. All of the siege weapons have one thing in common: these 5 buttons. The options are pretty straightforward. Keep the weapon unloaded. The second of the 3, which is load the weapon but do not fire and do not stand at the ready. The third and center button will have your siege operators stand at the ready but not fire at anything. The little training target allows them to fire either in a straight line or at specific targets for training purposes. And the last one is fire at will. If you find managing the individual siege weapons a little bit tedious, there is a screen under places called siege weapons. This allows you to enable or disable or set to training all of your individual siege weapons. But do be warned, Catapults and Ballista will friendly fire your dwarves, so if you are going to set up a training area, make sure you do it cautiously, unless you don't mind a little bit of Urist mist flying around. Now, you might be wondering, how important is the siege operator's skill, and how do I assign my dwarves? If you press Y on the keyboard, or open up the Jobs menu, you'll see this screen. Down at the bottom, there is a default option called Siege Operators. When you start a new game of Dwarf Fortress, it'll be set to Everybody Does This. But if you would like to specify what dwarves are going to do the task, then you can manually select them, and enable Only Selected do this. As far as how much does skill matter, the speed at which they can reload their ammunition is counted based on their Siege Operator skill. If they're an extremely talented Siege Operator, they will load the weapon very quickly, otherwise it'll take some time. It is worth training up some Siege Operators and specializing them so that you don't find yourself waiting half of the siege for Urist to reload a Ballista. I would also like to note that dwarves do get a little bit traumatized when they're witnessing things dying, and this does include while operating siege weapons. While they will soldier through and reload the weapon no matter how terrifying it is for them, if you start noticing a siege operator that's particularly upset, you might want to rethink their career choices and give them a task that they enjoy more. Unless you consider yourself an evil overlord, in which case, let them revel in their misery. Now you're probably wondering about their effectiveness. Well, let's do some tests. When you enable the little training mode icon, the siege weapons just shoot in a straight line, until the projectiles run out of momentum. But if you want an accurate image of how close they need to be in order to target an enemy, you can use archery targets. Using this technique, I was able to quickly identify that the closest tile range that they can target is 25 tiles away, in what seems to be a circular cone shape. Having identified the maximum possible range, I wanted to figure out what the cone of fire was on these weapons. To complete that test, I built this little demo arena. From there, I would forbid, unforbid, and construct archery targets until I reached the limit of their cone of fire. My identified cone of fire for the catapult roughly looks like this. Once I was happy with the result, I deconstructed the catapult and moved on to the ballista. After running the ballista through the same series of tests, it seems to have exactly the same cone of fire. And because of how the bolt throwers work on a swivel, it made sense to move on to the next test. I wanted to figure out if it made sense to put catapults and ballista on a wall. And if so, how high up would they be before you started to get diminishing returns? To figure this out, I built a 4-tier testing range, from a single high Z level all the way up to 4 Z levels tall at the top of the range. I would start with catapults, constructing archery targets right next to the ledge, until they're able to successfully hit them. Now, in order for this shot to be successful, I need the ammo to be destroyed. If the boulders don't break, the boulder wasn't going fast enough to actually have the desired effect of it shrapneling. The same goes for the ballista arrows and the bolt thrower bolts. So if you see ammunition landing on the ground in front of a target, that is a failed test. Once I figure out how close a target can be to the catapult, ballista, or bolt thrower, then I will add fortifications, because this extends the distance that they have to clear in order to start shooting down, meaning they won't be able to shoot as close to the bottom of the wall. So the second target is going to indicate how far they can shoot, while the siege engine is protected by a fortification. Once I locate these 2 spots, I then do a range test of 25 tiles, just to make sure that the extra height doesn't affect the firing range. Once I've determined these 3 distances, I then mark them with engravings and move on to the next level. Once we've completed the catapults, I will be moving on to ballista, followed by bolt throwers. If you'd like to see the end results of all of this, I have timestamps on this video that you can check. and this was the result of the catapult tests. The red zone indicates the areas that they are incapable of hitting. The blue zone is the minimum range, so if you're going to place your catapults onto walls, the red zone is essentially how wide you want your moat, or whatever impassable area to be. Whereas the yellow area is the area that's guaranteed to have range. The white line indicates the maximum targetable range, but projectiles will sail further if they miss. But we should move on to Ballista. The testing process was just about the same. Of course, if the ammunition doesn't break when it hits the target, it wasn't going fast enough. So I slowly, periodically moved the targets further and further out. The lowest level actually hit with or without the fortifications on at the same distance, which I thought was very interesting. But once I got to the second layer, I had to extend things out quite a bit further. And there was a few tiles difference between the fortifications and not fortifications after the first Z level, meaning it seems like it would be a good idea to put your ballista one tile up, whereas the catapults are going to need a little bit more range to actually hit anything. Now, of course, the bolt throwers are going to be a completely different story, but we'll have to wait until we get there. By the time we got to the top, though, there was quite a wide berth of area that would be kind of a dead zone, where you're not going to be able to hit anything. I don't think that this is super optimal for a fight, because you do want to be able to have a relatively close space that the ballistas or catapults would be able to hit from, because you don't want things to be able to just get close and then use covering fire. Because the way the enemy sieges work, if a bunch of friends are dying in a certain area, they try to avoid it. It becomes like a red zone when you're using pathing instructions. This was the result of the ballista test. And as you can see, it's quite a bit closer on the second Z level. And out of the two of these, if I had an option, I would probably put the ballista on the upper level and leave the catapults on the same plane as the things they're shooting at. But let's move on to the bolt throwers. Right off the bat, you can see that bolt throwers can shoot straight down. Essentially, if they're at the edge of something, they can shoot almost vertically downwards. Once I attach the fortifications, things become a little bit of a different story, but it is still able to shoot the closest to the proximity of the wall out of all of the siege equipment. Once we get to the second and third levels, we start to have the resulting ammunition not going fast enough to actually hit the thing, and making stacks. This isn't necessarily a negative, as it is colliding with the enemy, and in the case of the bolt throwers, I think it's the smallest issue. But it is still something that you need to keep in mind when using these for combat. You want things to stick in their targets when they hit them after all, and that's what happens when the ammunition disappears. As we move to the highest levels, there is once again kind of a wider margin of error for where the bolts will land. But it's still nothing compared to the catapults and ballista counterparts. Here is the results of the bolt thrower testing. The lowest one, I kind of got rid of the no-hit range because, well, without the fortifications there, they could hit the target directly in front of them. While they are the most flexible of the three weapon types, they do go through the most ammo and require the most preparation time to create ammo for them. Their maximum capacity is 100 bolts. For a little bit of comparison, that is almost a third of what your average crossbow squad can carry. So you are cramming through ammunition about as fast as you can make it. The biggest threat I've had while using these in actual sieges is keeping the ammo stockpile full without running out of shots. All in all, I hope that this video was useful to you. I had a little bit of fun making it. It's been a while since I've created any tutorials on this channel. I felt that all the guides in my current collection were enough to keep up with the demand. But with major mechanical changes like this, it's time to update my old tutorials. I will be working on a couple more over the next few months. And as always, thank you very much for watching and supporting this channel. I hope to see you in the live streams on twitch.tv/BLINDIRL. And until next time, thank you very much for watching.